Good morning. This is the Keeping It Real Sunday School class from Cornerstone Baptist Church in Richland, Missouri. I'm Dr. Max Thornsberry and I'm the teacher, and my wife Brenda will be reading the scriptures this morning out of the Authorized Version, the original King James Version of the Bible. We're continuing our story about Joseph. I need to give you just a little bit of background here. Joseph, as you remember, Judah had set up a circumstance where he would be sold to a caravan of Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and he is taken down into Egypt and he is sold to Potiphar. Now Potiphar is in charge of the temple guard. We'll see later on that he gets a different name, Potiphar Apah, P-H-H-P-A-H, Potiphar Apah, but he was also a priest to one of their gods, and it's thought by some lesson writers that he was the second in command of Egypt. And Potiphar bought Joseph and put him in charge of his house. The Bible goes so far to say that Potiphar had given him such control that he didn't know what was going on in his fields, he didn't know what was going on in his house, that God blessed Joseph, everything prospered, and he was second in command of Potiphar's home. Potiphar's wife set eyes upon him and tried to seduce him. And he told her that it would be a sin not only against Potiphar, it would be a sin against God, and he could not do it. One day when there wasn't anybody in the house but the wife, Joseph was going about his normal business, ministering the house, and she ran up to him and grabbed him, and he ran away from her, and she was able to hold his coat. She then took that coat, called in all the men of the house. Look what this man has tried to do to me. And then when Potiphar come home, Potiphar was, it says that his anger was kindled, but we think the anger was kindled against his wife. Potiphar knew that Joseph didn't do anything like that. Mm-hmm. And if you ever watch the movie, Joseph, the Coat of Many Colors, I think they depict Potiphar there more accurately. He's the one that took Joseph, got him all prepared to see Pharaoh. Anyway, Joseph is in prison. He interprets two dreams, some reason or another. It doesn't explain why, but Pharaoh got mad at his cupbearer, got mad at his baker, and put him in prison. Joseph comes in one morning and he sees that their countenance is down, that they're all sad. He says, "Why are you sad this morning?" They said, "Well, we both had a dream last night and they're almost identical." So he says, "Well, tell me the dreams. God will interpret them." So the cupbearer tells him he had 3 vines that grew up. They bloomed. He took the grapes, he squeezed them out in the cup and presented it to Pharaoh. He said, "That means in 3 days, Pharaoh's going to call you back up and put you back in charge as a butler, as the head of the household for Pharaoh." Turns to the baker. He says, "Tell me your dream." He said, "Well, I was working, and for 3 days I worked, and I made all these fancy things for the Pharaoh, and I had 3 baskets on the top of my head, and I set them on my head, and the birds came and stole the pastries and things that I had made up for Pharaoh." He said, 3 baskets means in 3 days you will be hung. Sorry about that.
Yeah, not a good dream. I think my dreams are crazy.
Well, it all came to pass that way. And when the Pharaoh had restored the cupbearer, Joseph said, "Don't forget me down here. Mm-hmm. Tell Pharaoh about me." So 2 years later, Pharaoh has a dream, and I'm sure you all remember the dream. He had big fat cattle come up out of the Nile River. They're grazing along, and all of a sudden, 7, did I say 10?
No.
What did I say? 7, right?
I don't know what you said.
7 years of famine. So
7
7 fat
years.
cows, and then 7 thin cows came out and eat them up, but they never did get fat. Then he woke up, went back to sleep, and then it talks about the grain. It says ears of corn, but there was no corn in the eastern hemisphere at this time. So he sees this grain growing up, big and fat and flush, and all of a sudden some thin grains come along, beaten by the wind, hardly any grain in their heads at all, and they eat up the fat ones, but they don't get any better. And so they called in. At that time, the cupbearer remembered and called in Joseph. Now, Joseph has to be prepared to go before the Pharaoh. It says that he was shaved, completely shaved from head to toe. He had to oil himself. He had to put on certain clothes, a certain amount of makeup. He goes in. Pharaoh tells him the dream, and he interprets as what the 7 is going to be 7 years. You're going to have 7 years of plenty, and then you're going to have 7 years of famine like the world has never seen. And my advice to you is to put away 20% of all the grain in the next 7 years so we'll have enough to eat and get us through the 7 bad years. Well, Pharaoh had called in all these musicians and all these doctors and all these learned men. They couldn't interpret the dream, and so he set up Joseph as second in command, and Potiphar gave his daughter to be his wife. He had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and Jacob blessed them as if they were his sons. And so you have 13 tribes, so to speak. And Manasseh and Ephraim then became the half-tribes, we call them. Well, let's go to Genesis 42. And all this has come to pass, the 7 good years and the 7 lean years. Joseph has built granaries all over Egypt. He stored up grain, he stored up food, he stored up root vegetables, turnips, and those kinds of things. And the famine has started, and it was a worldwide famine. Genesis 42, 1 through 5.
Now when Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said unto his sons, Why do ye look upon one another? And he said, Behold, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Get you down there, and buy for us from there, that we may live and not die. And Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob sent not with his brethren, for he said, Lest perhaps mischief befall him. And the sons of Israel came to buy grain among those that came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan.
So I don't know we need to go into too much of that, except that Jacob has kept Benjamin back with him. So now you have these 10 brothers, including Reuben, Simeon, and Judah, all go down to buy grain. And then let's go to, I need to set this up a little bit. They go there and they say that they're honest men, come down. Of course, Joseph recognizes them immediately and they don't recognize him. Joseph puts them in prison for 3 days, just to kind of have a little gig, I guess.
I guess.
And then they come back out and he says, Well, tell me about your father. Are there any other brothers? You know, he acts like, and so they tell him about Benjamin. And now we're going to go to 21 and read through 24.
And they said one to another, We are verily guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us.
Now, they are talking to themselves in prison. The
Yes,
10 brothers
yes,
are. Yeah.
And Reuben answered them, saying, Spoke I not unto you, saying, Do not sin against the child, and you would not hear? Therefore, behold, also his blood is required. And they knew not that Joseph understood them, for he spoke unto them by an interpreter. And he turned himself about from them, and wept, and returned to them again, and spoke with them, and took from them Simeon, and bound him before their eyes.
Now, they took Simeon, Joseph. Of course, Joseph understands Hebrew, and he hears them talking among themselves. And so he turned and he wept. He knew, this eventually got to come to a head here. They are blaming what they did to Joseph for what the stress they're in. And so he sends grain back with them, and they had paid him, and then he had the people who pared the grain put all their money back in the sacks. They go about part way out of town there, and they open a sack, and oh my goodness, there's the money. We're in trouble now. They set us up to kill us. They go on back to Jacob, and Simeon is retained. And Joseph has instructed them, bring Benjamin back so I can know that you're actually telling the truth. And so Reuben then has to go and convince Jacob to give up Benjamin, and they take him with him. And if you remember, he hid his silver cup. They had a big banquet, and he hid the silver cup in Benjamin's bag, and then they get a little ways out of town, and here comes the guard bearing down on him. Someone has stole the cup. It's not possible. Look in all the bags. So they start with Reuben and work their way down, and there it is in Benjamin's bag. And so in this particular case, Judah is offering himself to Joseph, and eventually he cannot restrain himself, and he reveals who he is. And they weep. They can't believe it. So now all the brothers are together. All 12 of them are together, but Jacob's still back. And he sends them back to get Jacob and bring Jacob with him. And so we're in 45, 1 through 5.
Then Joseph could not control himself before all them who stood before him, and he cried, "Cause every man to go out from me." And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph, doth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were terrified at his presence. And Joseph said unto his brethren, Come near to me, I pray you. And they came near. And he said, I am Joseph your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves that you sold me here, for God did send me before you to preserve life.
Well, they got all set up in Egypt. Pharaoh gave them the land of Goshen. Joseph instructs them, tell them that you're feeders of cattle. Don't tell them that you're got sheep, that you're shepherds, because Egyptians hate shepherds. Or the shepherds are abomination to them. And the theory behind that is that the southern tribes of Africa were coming in and stealing their sheep and their flocks, and so they had this negative attitude about Nubians, actually, Nubian goats, big old long-eared goats. Nubians were the ones that were accused of this, and so what do? They come in, Pharaoh has them, and what do y'all do for a living? We are shepherds. Just the total opposite of what he told them to do. But he let them keep their flocks and all their animals. I think there were 70 people that came with Joseph, if you count all the children, the 12 brothers, or the 11 brothers, Jacob, Leah, whoever was left there at that time. Joseph was 140 years old, and I think he lived another 17 years, maybe 7 or 7. You have to get in there and read all the specifics. That'd be a good trivia question right there. And eventually, when he died, he made him take him back, his body back, and bury it where Abraham was buried, where Rachel was buried, where Sarah was buried.
Did you mean to say Joseph or Jacob?
Jacob. Jacob eventually died.
Okay, well, you started out saying Joseph.
Oh, did I? I'm
yes.
sorry. Well,
those two names are really hard to keep
Joseph
straight.
took Jacob's body and had it embalmed, and they went through a 40-day mourning process. And Joseph went with them. And they had this big, huge Egyptian entourage, and they went up through there, and they mourned 7 days when they got there, and they buried Jacob with his ancestors. And then they all came back. And when they came back, the brothers met and said, he's going to kill us now.
Oh, yeah.
He's going to get even with us now. And Joseph had a long talk with him and said, you meant it for evil, and God meant it for good. Look at what is going to happen here. A nation is going to be saved. Little ones are going to be fed. You're not going to be in poverty. And then when you turn to the first chapter of Exodus, it says there arose up in Egypt a king who did not know Joseph. And eventually they get jealous of their numbers and their wealth, and they make slaves out of them, and along comes Moses. But this, by being in Egypt, it saved the nation of Israel, and they multiplied dramatically. A lot of historians think that when they left there was well over 1 million people. They were there 400 years, but phenomenal. They gave them the whole land of Goshen, which was the best grazing land there. So what do we gather out of this, Brenda? Be not grieved nor angry with yourselves, for you sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. Then when Jacob dies, he says, God meant it for good, you meant it for evil. What do we get out of this phenomenal story? One thing is when a Jew is involved, he's usually in charge. And I'm not meaning that in any negative way. God has done that over and over in the Bible. Look what happened to Daniel. What happened to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? They became governors of provinces. Daniel became second in command under 3 different kings. So quite an interesting way that God lifts up his people and chooses to allow them to prosper even in times of difficulty. So what do we gather out of this? Well, the lesson writer says we should journal about our life's experiences, and I think that's a bunch of hooey, to tell you the truth. And is there anyone we need to forgive? Well, I'm sure there probably is some people we need to forgive, but this was certainly no circumstance like most of us are ever going to be put up against. Joseph was a savior, saved the nation of Israel. He saved all of Israel, saved the 12 tribes of Israel, saved Jacob, his wives, all his grandchildren. And it is interesting that Judah is the one that eventually says, take me. Take me. We cannot let them go back without Benjamin. It will kill him. And Judah is the one that sold Joseph into slavery. And Joseph knows all this, and it still hasn't revealed it, to him exactly. But it's interesting how these men have changed. And then I want you to go over, Brenda, a little farther in Genesis. And I want to read how Judah is blessed by Jacob close to the time of his death, because we're going to go into Psalms next week and we're going to miss it altogether. We're in chapter 49 and start with verse 8. I said that it was Judah that set up those tribes of that tribe to be circumcised when it was their sister Diana.
Diana or Dinah? I don't know.
Diana. What's the song?
Someone's in the kitchen.
Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah. That's Dinah.
Okay.
All right. This is where Jacob is giving out the blessings to his sons. Of course, Reuben didn't get a good blessing. But I said that when their sister was raped, that the king's son came and said, I love her and I want to marry her, and even though I've already raped her, and it's a bad story. Well, the people that instigated that were Levi and Simeon, not Judah. So, let's read chapter 49, and just keep reading until I ask you to quit, please.
Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be, binding his foal unto the vine, and his ass's colt unto the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes shall be red with wine, his teeth white with milk. Zebulun shall...
That's it. That's far. Now, those are fortuitous and prophetic quotations, a blessing about Judah. The line of the tribe of Judah is Christ. Mm-hmm. Christ is going to come from that lineage. And notice that even though Judah has done some terrible things, story of Judah and Tamar, his daughter-in-law, but out of that relationship came Perez, and Perez is like great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of King David. Mm-hmm. So out of the lineage of Judah has come the line of the tribe of Judah. So what do we gather out of this lesson, Brenda, these series of lessons on Joseph? We gather one thing, that God has done everything to maintain the lineage of the Israelites in order that the Messiah might come from them.
Yes, and I think that you can say God is not author of evil, but he can use the circumstances however he wants. As far as, as he said, Joseph said, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Not that he was author of the evil, but that he used the circumstances still to follow his plan.
That is correct, and that is what God has done over and over in his word.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the evil that happened to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he is sitting at the right-hand throne of God, 100% man, 100% God.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's all I got. See you all next week.